I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who gets left out of her own son's wedding. But there I was, sitting in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, coffee getting cold in my hands, staring at my phone like it had just slapped me across the face. I'd sent a simple text to Marcus, just a mom asking a normal question. "Hey honey, what time is the wedding on Saturday? Want to make sure I'm there early to help with anything you need." 3 little dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then Vanessa's name popped up instead of my son's, my daughter-in-law. Well, technically she wasn't my daughter-in-law yet. Or so I thought. Her message came through cold and matter of fact. "We got married yesterday, just us and a few friends. Hope you understand." I read it once, twice, 5 times. The words didn't change. They got married yesterday. Yesterday, without telling me, without inviting me. My son got married, and I wasn't there. I sat there for, I don't know how long, just staring at those words on the screen. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of my neighbor's dog barking. My hands started shaking, and I had to put the phone down on the table before I dropped it. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe Vanessa meant something else. Maybe they had some small ceremony yesterday, but the real wedding was still on Saturday. My mind was scrambling for any explanation that made sense. Anyway, this wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew. I knew exactly what had happened. They'd cut me out. Deliberately, intentionally. My own son had gotten married without me there. I picked up the phone again with trembling fingers and called Marcus. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. His voice, bright and cheerful, told me to leave a message. I couldn't. I hung up and immediately called again. Same thing. Voicemail. He was avoiding me. My son was actually avoiding my calls. I felt something crack inside my chest, something that had been holding me together for the past 1.5 years since Marcus and Vanessa had gotten engaged. All the tension, all the little conflicts, all the passive-aggressive comments and cold shoulders had been leading to this moment. They'd been building toward cutting me out completely. And I'd been too blind, too hopeful, too desperate to believe my son still loved me to see it coming. Let me back up. Let me tell you how I got here. Sitting in my kitchen at 53 years old, realizing my son doesn't want me in his life anymore. It started 2 years ago when Marcus first brought Vanessa home for dinner. I was so excited to meet her. Marcus had been single for a while after a bad breakup in college, and hearing that he'd met someone special made my heart soar. The breakup had been hard on him. He'd dated a girl named Ashley for 3 years, and when she ended things suddenly, Marcus had been devastated. For months, he barely left his apartment except for work. I'd worried about him constantly, calling probably too often, showing up with groceries and home-cooked meals, trying to be there for him in the way mothers do. Eventually, he'd healed. He'd started going out with friends again, picked up running as a hobby, seemed to find himself again. And then he met Vanessa. The change in him was immediate and obvious. He smiled more. He talked about future plans. He had this light in his eyes that had been missing for so long. I was thrilled. My boy was happy again. That's all any mother wants. So when he called and asked if he could bring Vanessa to dinner, I practically screamed with excitement. I spent the whole day cooking his favorite foods. Pot roast with all the vegetables he'd loved since he was little. Mashed potatoes made from scratch the way his grandmother taught me. The green bean casserole he always asked for at holidays. Apple pie for dessert because it was his absolute favorite. I cleaned the house until it sparkled, dusting every surface, vacuuming twice, making sure everything was perfect. I set the table with the good china my mother had given me when I got married, the delicate plates with little flowers around the edges that I almost never used because they felt too special for every day. But this was special. This was my son bringing home the woman he loved. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted Vanessa to feel welcome, to see that our family was warm and loving, that she'd be embraced with open arms. I even went out and bought fresh flowers for the table, white roses that I arranged in my mother's crystal vase. I changed my outfit 3 times, wanting to look nice but not too formal, approachable but still put together. By the time they arrived, I was practically vibrating with nervous excitement. Vanessa walked in wearing ripped jeans and a tank top, her arms covered in tattoos, her hair dyed an unnatural shade of purple. I smiled anyway. I wasn't going to judge her based on appearance. Marcus looked happy, and that's what mattered. But from the moment she sat down at my table, I could feel the ice coming off her. She barely spoke unless Marcus asked her a direct question. She picked at her food. When I asked her about her family, her job, her interests, trying to get to know her, she gave me one-word answers and kept looking at Marcus like she wanted to leave. I told myself she was just nervous. First time meeting the boyfriend's mom. That's stressful. I could understand that. I tried harder to make her comfortable, but everything I said seemed to make things worse. After dinner, I was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher when I heard Vanessa's voice from the living room. She wasn't trying to whisper. "Your mom is a lot," she said to Marcus. I froze, a plate still in my hands. She asks so many questions. It feels like an interrogation. I waited for Marcus to defend me, to tell her I was just trying to be friendly, trying to get to know her. Instead, he said, "Yeah, she can be intense sometimes. Just give her a chance. She means well." She means well. Like I was some annoying but harmless burden he had to tolerate. I finished loading the dishwasher in silence, my hands shaking, and when they left that night, I cried for an hour. But I didn't give up. I kept trying. When Marcus announced they were engaged 6 months later, I was genuinely happy for them. I pushed down the hurt feelings, the sense that Vanessa didn't like me, and threw myself into being supportive. I offered to help with wedding planning. Vanessa said she had it under control. I asked if she wanted to go dress shopping together. She said she was going with her mom and sisters. I suggested we have lunch, just the two of us, so we could bond. She said she was too busy with work. Every door I tried to open, she slammed in my face. And Marcus said nothing. He just stood by and watched his fiancée freeze me out. The real problem started when they began planning the wedding. Vanessa wanted a destination wedding in Hawaii. I'd been saving money for years, anticipating helping with wedding costs. My parents had paid for my wedding, and I wanted to do the same for Marcus. When I offered to contribute, Vanessa's response was clipped. "We're paying for it ourselves. We don't need your money." I tried not to feel rejected. I told myself it was admirable that they wanted to be independent, but Marcus had mentioned they were stressed about the cost, and I knew they'd been arguing about the budget. I was offering help, and they were turning it down out of what felt like pure stubbornness or maybe pride. Or maybe Vanessa just didn't want to owe me anything, didn't want me to have any part of their special day. Then came the guest list drama. I'd given Marcus a list of about 30 people from our side of the family: aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends who'd known Marcus since he was born, people who loved him, who'd been part of his life forever. A week later, Marcus called and said they could only accommodate 10 people from my list. The venue was small, he explained. Vanessa's family was big. They had to make cuts. I understood about budget constraints and venue capacity, but 10 people? I'd have to choose between my own sister and my cousin, who was like a sister to me. I'd have to leave out my best friend who'd held Marcus as a baby, who'd been there for us when his father left. I tried to explain this to Marcus, tried to help him understand how hurtful these cuts would be, how many people would be devastated not to see him get married. He got defensive. "This is our wedding, Mom, not yours. We get to decide who comes." Technically, he was right. It was their wedding. But I was his mother. Didn't that count for something? Didn't I get any say at all? I was the one who'd raised him alone after his father walked out when Marcus was 7. I was the one who'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, who'd sacrificed sleep and social life and my own dreams to make sure he had everything he needed. I was the one who'd sat up with him during nightmares, who'd taught him to drive, who'd helped him through his first heartbreak, who'd moved him into his college dorm and cried all the way home because my baby was growing up. And now I was being told I didn't even get to have my family at his wedding because his fiancé's preferences mattered more than my feelings. I swallowed my hurt and cut the list down to 10. It killed me to make those calls, to tell people they weren't invited, to hear the disappointment and confusion in their voices. My Aunt Dolores cried. She'd helped raise Marcus during the summers when I had to work. She'd taught him to swim, to bake cookies, to play poker, and she wasn't invited to his wedding. But I did it. I made the cuts. I sacrificed my relationships to make Marcus and Vanessa happy, and I thought that would be the end of it. I thought once I proved I could be flexible, could put their wishes first, things would get better. They didn't get better, they got worse. Every time I tried to be involved in the wedding planning, I was shut out. Vanessa didn't want my input on flowers, decorations, music, food, anything. When I asked Marcus about it, he said Vanessa had a specific vision and didn't want too many opinions clouding her judgment. Translation: my opinion didn't matter. My taste wasn't good enough. At the engagement party, which I wasn't allowed to help plan or host, I overheard Vanessa talking to her bridesmaids. "I just want everything to be perfect," she was saying. "No drama, no stress, just exactly how we want it." One of her friends laughed and said something I couldn't quite hear, and Vanessa responded, "Oh, don't worry. I'm keeping certain people on a tight leash." The way she glanced in my direction made it crystal clear who she was talking about. I tried to talk to Marcus about it the next day. Really talk, the way we used to before Vanessa came into the picture. We met for coffee, just the two of us, and I thought maybe this was my chance to reconnect with my son, to understand what was happening between us. I told him I felt excluded. I told him I was hurt. I tried to stay calm, to not sound accusatory, but I needed him to know how I was feeling. His response shattered me. "Mom, you have to understand that Vanessa is my priority now. She's going to be my wife. If there's ever a choice between making you happy and making her happy, I'm going to choose her every time." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I understood that his wife should be his priority. I'd always known that when he got married, his allegiance would shift. But did it have to be so absolute? Did loving her mean he couldn't love me too? Did making her happy require making me miserable? I left that coffee shop feeling like I'd lost my son, like he was already gone, already choosing her over me in every way that mattered. And maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was being too sensitive, too demanding, too clingy. Maybe I needed to back off and give them space. So that's what I did. I stopped asking about wedding plans. I stopped offering help. I stopped trying to insert myself into their lives. If they wanted me, they could reach out. I wasn't going to keep pushing my way into places I wasn't wanted. The result was radio silence. Weeks would go by without hearing from Marcus. When I called him, our conversations were short and superficial. He was busy with work, with Vanessa, with wedding planning, with everything except me. I was being erased from his life, slowly but surely, and I didn't know how to stop it. The wedding was supposed to be in 6 weeks. 6 weeks from the Tuesday morning when I sent that text asking about timing. I'd been planning what to wear, thinking about my speech at the reception, imagining watching my son say his vows. I'd been holding on to those images like a lifeline, proof that despite everything, I was still his mother, still important enough to be there for the biggest day of his life. And then that text came. "We got married yesterday," like it was nothing. Like my presence or absence was completely irrelevant. Like I was just another acquaintance they'd forgotten to notify. I finally got Marcus on the phone that evening. He answered on the 6th ring, his voice wary. "Hey, Mom." That was it. Just, hey. Like he hadn't just shattered my entire world. I asked him why. Why had they done this? Why hadn't they told me? Why had I been excluded from my own son's wedding? His explanations were a mess of half-truths and excuses. They decided to do something small and intimate. The big wedding was too stressful. Vanessa wanted something simple. It was spontaneous. They'd only decided a few days ago. None of it made sense because underneath all the rationalizations, the truth was simple. They didn't want me there. Marcus couldn't say it directly, but I heard it in every pause, every hesitation. Vanessa had wanted to get married without me, and Marcus had gone along with it. I asked him point blank, "Did you not want me at your wedding?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was tight. "Mom, it's complicated. You and Vanessa don't get along. We didn't want any tension on our special day. We wanted it to be drama-free. Drama-free. As if my presence automatically meant drama. As if I was the problem. The source of all their stress. I'd never caused a scene. I'd never been anything but supportive, even when they'd cut me out of planning, even when they'd slashed my guest list, even when Vanessa had made it abundantly clear she didn't want me around. I'd swallowed my hurt and tried to be gracious. And this was my reward. Exclusion, erasure, being treated like I was toxic when all I'd ever done was love my son. After I hung up, I sat in the dark living room and let myself cry in a way I hadn't cried since Marcus's father left. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal. I'd raised Marcus alone. I'd given up so much for him. Relationships I might have had because I was too busy being a single mom. Career opportunities I'd turned down because they would have meant less time with my son. Travel, hobbies, dreams I'd deferred or abandoned completely because raising him was my priority. I'd done everything I could to be a good mother. And somehow, I'd ended up here. Shut out. Unwanted. Replaced. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions of my life, but nothing felt real. I went to work at the dental office where I'd been a hygienist for 27 years. I smiled at patients, cleaned their teeth, made small talk about their lives while my own was falling apart. My coworker Jennifer asked if I was okay. She'd been hearing about wedding planning drama for months. I told her the wedding was off, which was technically true. The wedding I'd been expecting, the one where I got to see my son get married, was definitely off. She looked concerned but didn't push, and I was grateful. I wasn't ready to admit the truth out loud yet. That would make it real in a way I couldn't handle. I kept thinking about all the moments I'd missed. Walking Marcus down the aisle since there was no father to do it. Seeing him in his suit before the ceremony. Straightening his tie the way I used to when he was little. Dancing with him at the reception. Watching him cut the cake with his new wife. Giving a toast about what an incredible person he'd grown into. All of those moments, gone. Stolen from me. And for what? Because Vanessa didn't like me? Because I'd committed the terrible crime of trying too hard to be a good mother-in-law? Because my love for my son was somehow threatening to their relationship? I started going through old photo albums, something I never did because it was too painful. Pictures of Marcus as a baby, chubby and smiling, reaching for the camera. Marcus as a toddler, covered in mud from playing in the backyard. Marcus on his first day of school, missing his 2 front teeth, so proud of his new backpack. Marcus at his high school graduation, tall and handsome in his cap and gown, his arm around me, both of us grinning at the camera. In every picture, I could remember exactly how I'd felt in that moment. The overwhelming love, the fierce protectiveness, the desperate hope that I was doing enough, being enough, giving him what he needed. I'd poured everything I had into raising him, and now he'd cut me out like I was nothing. My sister Rachel finally called me 4 days after the text. She'd heard about the wedding from Marcus's cousin, who'd somehow found out through social media. Rachel was furious on my behalf. "That is unacceptable," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "How dare he do that to you? After everything you've done for him? After all the sacrifices you made?" It felt good to have someone validate my feelings, to confirm that yes, this was cruel and wrong. But it also made me defensive of Marcus. Despite everything, I didn't want people bad-mouthing my son. I made excuses for him. Vanessa had probably pressured him into it. He was young and didn't understand how much it would hurt me. He'd made a mistake, but he'd realize it eventually and apologize. Rachel didn't buy any of it. "Stop protecting him," she said. "He's a grown man who made a choice to hurt you. You need to stop making excuses for him and start protecting yourself." Protecting myself. I didn't even know what that meant anymore. My whole identity for the past 31 years had been Marcus's mom. That was who I was. That was my purpose, my joy, my reason for getting up every morning. Take that away, and who was I? Just a 53-year-old woman with a dead-end job, no partner, no hobbies I'd kept up with, no life outside of being a mother to someone who didn't seem to want a mother anymore. The thought was terrifying. If I wasn't Marcus's mom, if that relationship was broken beyond repair, then what did I have? What was the point of any of it? I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Patricia Chen, a kind woman in her 60s who specialized in family dynamics. I was skeptical at first. Therapy felt like admitting defeat, like saying I couldn't handle my own problems. I'd always been the strong one, the one who held everything together, the one who solved problems rather than creating them. Admitting I needed help felt like failure. But I was drowning, and I needed someone to throw me a lifeline. My sister Rachel had practically forced me to make the appointment, threatening to make it for me if I didn't do it myself. So I called Dr. Chen's office, my hands shaking, and scheduled an intake appointment. The waiting room was decorated in calming blues and greens, with abstract art on the walls and soft music playing. I sat there feeling exposed and vulnerable, like everyone could see how broken I was. When Dr. Chen came out to greet me, she had such a kind face, warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, that I almost cried right there. In our first session, I told her everything. The whole history of my relationship with Vanessa, the wedding planning nightmare, the text message, Marcus's excuses. I cried through most of it, going through half a box of tissues that Dr. Chen kept sliding closer to me across the coffee table between us. When I finished, my throat raw from talking and crying, Dr. Chen asked me a simple question that I couldn't answer. What do you want from this relationship with your son? I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. What did I want? I wanted things to go back to how they were before Vanessa. I wanted my son to love me the way he used to. I wanted to matter to him again. I wanted to be the most important woman in his life, like I'd been for 30 years. But Dr. Chen pushed further, her voice gentle but persistent. Is that realistic? Can you go back? No. Of course not. We couldn't go back. Marcus was married now. His life had moved forward, and I was stuck in the past, clinging to a version of our relationship that didn't exist anymore. That first session left me emotionally exhausted, but also strangely hopeful. For the first time since the wedding text, I felt like maybe there was a path forward. Maybe I didn't have to stay stuck in this pain forever. Over the next several weeks, Dr. Chen and I unpacked a lot of painful truths. She helped me see patterns in my behavior that I'd been blind to. The way I'd made Marcus the center of my entire universe. The way I'd neglected my own needs and identity because being his mother was enough. The way I'd sometimes used guilt as a tool, reminding him of my sacrifices, making him feel responsible for my happiness. None of this excused what he'd done. Nothing could make it okay that he'd excluded me from his wedding. But I started to understand that our problems didn't begin with Vanessa. They'd been building for years, and I'd been too close to see them. I'd been so focused on being a good mother that I'd never learned to let Marcus grow up and away from me. I'd held on too tight, and when he tried to establish boundaries, I'd seen it as rejection instead of a natural part of him becoming his own person. This realization didn't make the pain go away. If anything, it made it worse for a while. Because now I had to confront the possibility that I'd contributed to this disaster. That maybe Vanessa wasn't entirely wrong to want distance from me. That maybe Marcus had felt suffocated by my love and had grabbed the first exit he could find. It was easier when I could just blame them, when I could be the victim of their cruelty. Accepting my own role in the breakdown of our relationship meant accepting that I'd made mistakes, that I'd hurt my son even while trying to love him. That was a hard pill to swallow. Dr. Chen gave me homework. She wanted me to write a letter to Marcus that I wouldn't send. A letter where I could say everything I needed to say without filter, without worrying about his reaction or trying to preserve the relationship. I sat down one Saturday morning with a cup of tea and a blank notebook and started writing. I wrote about my anger at being excluded from the wedding. I wrote about feeling betrayed and dismissed. I wrote about all the ways Vanessa had made me feel unwelcome from day one. But then I kept writing, and other things came out. I wrote about my fear of losing Marcus. I wrote about how empty my life felt without him in it. I wrote about the crushing loneliness of being a single parent with no partner to share the load, no one to reassure me I was doing okay. I wrote about how much pressure I'd put on Marcus to be enough for me, to fill all the empty spaces in my life. I wrote for hours, filling page after page, and when I finally stopped, my hand was cramping and my face was wet with tears. But I felt lighter, like I'd released something toxic I'd been carrying around. Reading back through that letter, I saw my relationship with Marcus more clearly than I ever had. I'd made him responsible for my emotional well-being in ways that weren't fair or healthy. When he pulled away, I'd panicked and pushed harder, which only made him pull away more. Vanessa had seen this dynamic and probably felt protective of Marcus, wanting to free him from my grip. And instead of recognizing what was happening, instead of adjusting my behavior, I doubled down. I tried even harder to insert myself into their lives, to prove I was necessary, to hold on to my role as Marcus's mom, even as he was trying to become his own man. No wonder they'd excluded me from the wedding. I'd been a constant source of pressure and stress for them. This understanding didn't excuse their behavior. They still could have handled it better. They could have been honest with me instead of shutting me out. They could have set clear boundaries and given me a chance to respect them. But I couldn't control what they did. I could only control what I did. And what I needed to do was let go. Not give up on the relationship entirely, but let go of my grip on it. Stop trying to force it to be what I wanted and accept it for what it was. Marcus was an adult with his own life, his own marriage, his own priorities. I didn't get to be the center of his world anymore. That was hard to accept, but it was the truth. I started making changes in my own life, small ones at first. I joined a book club that met every other Tuesday at the local library. I hadn't read for pleasure in years because I'd always been too busy or too tired. But I found I loved it. The first book we read was a memoir about a woman hiking the Pacific Crest Trail alone. Something about her journey, about choosing to step into the unknown and challenge herself, resonated deeply with me. I stayed after the discussion ended, talking with two other women, Linda and Joyce, about our own fears and dreams. They invited me to coffee the following week, and I went, and we talked for 3 hours. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had friends who were just mine, not people I knew through Marcus or through being a mom. The discussions were lively, the other members were friendly, and it gave me something to look forward to besides waiting for Marcus to call. I started taking walks in the evening, something I'd abandoned when Marcus moved out because it felt lonely doing it alone. But I pushed through the discomfort and found that I enjoyed the quiet time to think, the fresh air, the way my body felt stronger the more I walked. I had a route I followed through the neighborhood, past the park where I used to take Marcus when he was little, along the creek that ran through town. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way the light changed as the seasons shifted, the sound of birds in the trees, the different flowers blooming in people's yards. It was like I'd been sleepwalking through my life for years and was finally waking up. I reached out to old friends I'd lost touch with over the years because I'd been so consumed with being a mother. Some of those friendships were too far gone to revive. When I called my college roommate Stephanie, the conversation was stilted and awkward. We'd grown into completely different people, but others picked up like no time had passed. My friend from my first job, Karen, was thrilled to hear from me. She'd gone through her own difficult transition when her kids left for college, and we bonded over the strangeness of redefining yourself after decades of being primarily a parent. One of those friends was Margaret, who I'd known since college. We'd been close once, but we'd drifted apart after she got married and I became a single mom. Our lives just went in different directions. But when I called her, nervous and unsure if she'd even remember me, she was thrilled to hear from me. We met for lunch and she listened to the whole story about Marcus and the wedding. Her response surprised me. "I'm glad this happened," she said. I must have looked shocked because she laughed and explained. "Not glad you're hurt, but glad you're finally waking up. I've watched you for 30 years put everything into Marcus and nothing into yourself. It was painful to watch, honestly. You deserve to have a life of your own. Maybe this is your chance to build one." I started thinking about what I actually wanted from my life, separate from Marcus. It was a strange exercise. For so long, my wants and his needs had been completely intertwined. Every decision I made, from what job to take to where to live to how to spend my free time, had been filtered through the question of what was best for Marcus. But if I stripped away all of that, what was left? What did I care about? What brought me joy? I realized I'd always loved art but had never pursued it because there was never time or money for classes. As a kid, I'd spent hours drawing and painting, losing myself in the creative process. My mother had encouraged it, signing me up for summer art camps, buying me supplies for birthdays and Christmas. I'd dreamed of going to art school, of becoming a real artist. But then I'd gotten pregnant with Marcus during my junior year of college, and everything changed. My boyfriend, Marcus's father, had made it clear he wasn't interested in being a parent. He'd given me money for an abortion and walked away. I'd chosen to keep the baby, which meant dropping out of school, getting a job, giving up on art school. I told myself it didn't matter, that having Marcus was worth any sacrifice. And it was. I didn't regret choosing him. But I'd buried that part of myself so completely that I'd almost forgotten it existed. Now, with Marcus grown and gone, with therapy helping me reclaim pieces of my identity, I decided to explore that old passion again. I started watching YouTube tutorials on watercolor painting, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, taking notes like a student. I bought some basic supplies from the art store, nervous about spending the money but telling myself I deserved this. A set of watercolor paints, brushes in different sizes, watercolor paper, a palette. When I got home and spread everything out on the table, I felt like a kid on Christmas morning. My first attempts were terrible, laughably bad. The paint bled in ways I didn't expect. My brush strokes were clumsy and uncertain. The colors muddied together instead of creating the soft gradients I'd seen in the tutorials. But there was something deeply satisfying about the process. About mixing colors on the palette, about watching the paint bloom across the wet paper, about losing myself in trying to capture the image in my mind. I kept at it, painting almost every evening after work. Slowly, gradually, I got better. I learned about wet on wet versus wet on dry techniques. I learned how to layer colors, how to let things dry between layers, how to preserve white space. I wasn't going to be featured in any galleries, but that wasn't the point. The point was I was doing something for myself, something that had nothing to do with being Marcus's mother, something that was just mine. 3 months after the wedding I wasn't invited to, Marcus finally reached out. He sent a text asking if we could talk. My first instinct was to jump at the chance, to immediately say yes, to be grateful he was finally acknowledging my existence. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type, "Yes, when, where, I can meet you anywhere, anytime." But I made myself wait. I set the phone down and took several deep breaths. I thought about what I wanted from this conversation, what boundaries I needed to set. What did I actually want to say to him? How did I want to show up? I didn't want to be desperate and grateful for scraps of his attention. I didn't want to immediately forgive him and pretend everything was fine. But I also didn't want to rage at him, to make him defensive, to push him further away. I talked it through with Dr. Chen at my next session. She helped me identify what I needed to communicate and how to do it without attacking or pleading. And then I responded to Marcus's text, suggesting we meet for coffee the following week. Not immediately. Not dropping everything for him. On my timeline, when I was ready. It felt like a small act of self-respect, but it mattered. It was me saying that my time and emotional preparation were valuable too. We met at a cafe halfway between our homes. Marcus looked nervous when he walked in, his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes not quite meeting mine. We ordered coffee and sat at a corner table, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology," he said. "The way we handled the wedding wasn't right. I should have talked to you. I should have been honest instead of just shutting you out." I waited. There was more I needed to hear, and I wasn't going to make this easy for him. He continued, his voice strained. "Vanessa and I were stressed, and we convinced ourselves that a small wedding would be better. But the truth is, we didn't want any conflict. And we thought if you were there would be tension. So we just didn't invite you. It was cowardly. I'm sorry." It wasn't the full apology I wanted. He was still blaming the situation, still suggesting my presence would have caused problems, still making excuses. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that what they'd done was wrong. I took a deep breath and told him how I'd felt. Not accusatory, not trying to make him feel guilty, just honest. I told him how devastating it had been to be excluded. I told him how much I'd missed him over the past months. But then I also told him what I'd learned about myself. I told him I understood I'd been too involved in his life, too dependent on our relationship for my own happiness. I told him I was working on building my own life, my own identity separate from being his mom. I told him I wanted a relationship with him, but it had to be different from before. It had to be healthier, with better boundaries on both sides. Marcus looked relieved. I think he'd been expecting me to rage at him, to demand things, to put him in an impossible position. My calmness, my willingness to take responsibility for my part, seemed to catch him off guard. We talked for 2 hours, more honestly than we had in years. He told me about the pressure he'd felt from me growing up, always trying to be enough for me, always feeling like he had to make up for his absent father. He told me about falling in love with Vanessa and feeling pulled in 2 directions, wanting to make her happy, but also not wanting to hurt me. He told me the wedding had been beautiful, but also sad because I wasn't there. And he'd felt guilty the whole time, even though he couldn't admit it until now. I asked about Vanessa, about whether she knew he was meeting with me. He hesitated, then admitted she didn't. They'd been arguing about me, about whether to try to repair the relationship or just let it go. Vanessa wanted to maintain distance. She felt I'd never accepted her, never respected their relationship. And maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't fully accepted her because I'd seen her as competition for Marcus's love instead of as a partner who made him happy. That was something I needed to work on. I asked Marcus if Vanessa would be willing to meet with me, to talk things through. He wasn't sure but said he'd ask. 2 weeks later, Vanessa agreed to have coffee with me, just the two of us. I was terrified. This woman had been the source of so much pain and conflict, and part of me still resented her deeply. Part of me blamed her for everything that had gone wrong. If she'd just been warmer, more welcoming, more willing to let me be part of their lives, none of this would have happened. But I'd promised myself I would try. I would approach this with openness and honesty and see if we could find some common ground. The night before our meeting, I barely slept. I kept rehearsing what I wanted to say, how I wanted to present myself. I wanted to be honest but not accusatory. Vulnerable but not pathetic. Strong but not defensive. It was an impossible balance. Vanessa walked into the cafe looking as wary as I felt. She was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater. Her purple hair now dyed a more natural dark brown, no makeup. She looked young and tired and nervous. We ordered drinks and sat down at a corner table, and for a moment we just looked at each other. The silence stretched out uncomfortably. Finally, I decided to just dive in. I apologized. For making her feel judged from that very first dinner. For being too pushy with wedding planning, offering my opinions when they weren't wanted. For not respecting their boundaries. For pushing my way into their lives when they were trying to establish their own family unit. For making it harder for her to build a life with my son. For any pain I'd caused her, even unintentionally. She looked shocked. Her eyes went wide and she set down her coffee cup like she was afraid she might drop it. Whatever she'd been expecting, it wasn't that. I could see her trying to process, to recalibrate her understanding of who I was and what this conversation was going to be. She was quiet for a moment, then started talking. She told me about her own family, about a mother who was critical and controlling, who made every decision about Vanessa's life until she finally moved across the country to escape. She told me that when she met me, when she saw how involved I was in Marcus's life, she'd panicked. She'd seen her mother all over again, someone who would try to control their marriage, who would always be inserting herself into their decisions. She'd made up her mind that I was the enemy before really giving me a chance. And once she'd decided that, she'd interpreted everything I did through that lens. Every offer to help was an attempt to take over. Every question was an interrogation. Every expression of love for Marcus was a threat to their relationship. Hearing her perspective was painful, but also illuminating. We'd both been operating from fear. Me, afraid of losing my son. Her, afraid of being controlled. And Marcus had been caught in the middle, trying to please everyone and ultimately pleasing no one. We talked for a long time, and slowly, tentatively, we found some understanding. We might never be close. We might never have the warm, loving relationship I'd once hoped for. But we could respect each other. We could set clear boundaries and stick to them. We could both love Marcus without it being a competition. The process of rebuilding trust was slow and sometimes painful. Marcus and I started having regular lunches, just the two of us, where we talked about our lives without the weight of all our history crushing every conversation. I told him about my book club, my painting, the volunteer work I'd started doing at a local animal shelter. He told me about his job, his hobbies, his life with Vanessa. It was strange at first, relating to him as an adult, separate from me rather than as my son who I needed to protect and guide. But it was also freeing. I was getting to know Marcus as a person, not just as the child I'd raised. Vanessa and I maintained a careful distance, but it was a respectful distance. She invited me to dinner at their apartment a few months after our coffee meeting. I brought flowers and wine and bit my tongue a dozen times when I wanted to comment on their decorating choices or offer unsolicited advice. I let them host me in their space, on their terms, and it went okay. Not perfect, but okay. We were all learning how to navigate this new dynamic. The holidays were hard. It was the first Thanksgiving and Christmas without Marcus at my house. For 31 years, we'd had our traditions. Thanksgiving morning, we'd watch the parade together while I prepped the turkey. He'd help me make the stuffing, the same recipe his grandmother had used. We'd eat dinner in the late afternoon, just the two of us, and then watch football while working our way through leftover pie. Christmas Eve, we'd drive around looking at lights, stopping for hot chocolate at our favorite diner. Christmas morning, we'd open presents slowly, savoring each one, and then I'd make my special French toast casserole for breakfast. These traditions had been the backbone of my year, the things I looked forward to and planned around. And now they were gone. Marcus and Vanessa were creating their own traditions, their own family rituals, and I wasn't part of them. He and Vanessa hosted Thanksgiving with her family at their apartment. When Marcus called to tell me the plans, my heart sank. But I kept my voice cheerful and said that sounded lovely, that I hoped they had a wonderful time. I spent Thanksgiving with Rachel and her family. It was nice. Rachel's kids were teenagers, loud and funny and full of energy. Her husband Dave grilled the turkey outside, which I'd never seen done before. The food was good, the company was warm, but it wasn't my tradition. It wasn't Marcus. I found myself fighting back tears while mashing potatoes, grateful that Rachel's kitchen was crowded enough that no one noticed. Christmas, they agreed to split the day, having breakfast with Vanessa's family and dinner with me. Marcus called me a week before to arrange it. His voice careful and formal, like he was negotiating a business deal rather than planning a holiday with his mother. "We'll come over around 5, he said, "if that works for you. If that works for me." Like I might have other plans, other people more important to spend Christmas with. But I swallowed my hurt and said 5 was perfect. It wasn't the full day I used to have with Marcus, the lazy morning in pajamas opening presents, the whole afternoon cooking together, the evening watching old Christmas movies. But I accepted it without complaint. This was the new reality, sharing holidays, sharing time, being one part of his life instead of the whole thing. I set the table for 3 with my good china. I cooked a scaled-down version of our traditional dinner. I wrapped presents carefully, trying not to spend too much or get things that were too personal, walking the tightrope between showing I cared and not being overbearing. When they arrived, Marcus hugged me, and it felt both familiar and strange. Vanessa was polite, complimenting the decorations, thanking me for having them. We ate dinner making careful small talk. It was fine, pleasant even. But it lacked the ease and intimacy of what we'd had before. We were all trying so hard to be appropriate, to respect boundaries, to not step on each other's feelings, that there was no room for real connection. They left by 8. I cleaned up the kitchen alone, put away the leftovers, and sat in my living room surrounded by the remnants of Christmas. And I let myself cry for what I'd lost, for the holidays that used to be, before forcing myself to stop and be grateful for what I had. They'd come, they'd spent time with me. It was more than I'd had 3 months ago. I needed to focus on that. I kept going to therapy. Dr. Chen and I worked through layers of grief and adjustment. Grief for the relationship I'd had with Marcus when he was young. Grief for the future I'd imagined, where I'd be deeply involved in my grandchildren's lives, where Marcus would need me and want me around all the time. That future wasn't going to happen, at least not the way I'd pictured it. I had to let go of those expectations and accept what was actually possible. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, harder even than single parenting through the tough years, because this grief was about losing something I'd already had, rather than never having it in the first place. But alongside the grief came growth. I was building a life that didn't revolve entirely around Marcus. I'd started taking art classes at the community college. I'd joined a hiking group that went on weekend excursions. I'd even gone on a few dates, which felt awkward and weird at first, but gradually became less terrifying. None of the relationships went anywhere serious, but that was okay. I was learning how to be a whole person again, someone with interests and passions and relationships beyond just being Marcus's mom. It felt good, scary and unfamiliar, but good. About a year after the wedding, Marcus and Vanessa invited me to a small barbecue at their place. Just me, Vanessa's parents, and her sister and brother-in-law. It was the first time I'd been included in something that blended both families. I almost declined because the anxiety of meeting Vanessa's family, of being judged by them, felt overwhelming. But I made myself go. I bought a nice bottle of wine, took deep breaths in the car before walking up to their door, and told myself I could do this. I could be gracious and warm and appropriate without being overbearing. The barbecue went surprisingly well. Vanessa's mom, Patricia, was friendly and welcoming. We talked about gardening, which we both enjoyed, and by the end of the evening, we'd exchanged numbers and made plans to visit a botanical garden together. Vanessa's dad, Robert, was quieter, but he seemed kind. Her sister, Melissa, was funny, and included me in conversations without making me feel like an outsider. I left that evening feeling hopeful for the first time in a long time. Maybe we could all figure this out. Maybe I could have a place in Marcus's life that worked for everyone. But there were still setbacks. Vanessa got pregnant, and they waited until she was 4 months along to tell me. I found out through a group text they sent to both families at the same time. It stung. I'd hoped I would have been told sooner, maybe in person, maybe just the three of us. But they'd chosen to tell everyone at once, treating me like any other extended family member rather than as Marcus's mom. I felt that old hurt flare up, the sense of being excluded and undervalued. I almost sent an angry text, almost called Marcus to tell him how much this hurt. But I stopped myself. I called Dr. Chen instead and talked through my feelings. She reminded me that this was their pregnancy, their news to share how they wanted. My hurt feelings didn't mean they'd done something wrong. They were establishing boundaries, and I needed to respect them even when it was hard. I sent a warm, congratulatory text to the group chat. Then I called Marcus separately and told him how happy I was for them, how excited I was to be a grandmother. I kept my hurt to myself. That was my burden to carry, not his. He seemed relieved by my reaction, and we talked about the pregnancy, the due date, their hopes and fears. It wasn't the intimate conversation I'd once imagined having when my son told me he was going to be a father. But it was something. It was a connection, fragile but real. As Vanessa's pregnancy progressed, they slowly started including me more. I got invited to the baby shower. I was asked to help set up the nursery. Small things, but they mattered. I was careful not to overstep, to always ask before offering advice, to let them take the lead on decisions. It was hard sometimes, biting my tongue when they made choices I wouldn't have made. But they were the parents. It was their child. My role was to support them, not to direct them. When my granddaughter Emma was born, Marcus called me from the hospital. Not a text. A real phone call. I was at home, trying to distract myself with painting, when my phone rang. I saw his name on the screen and my heart started racing. Vanessa had been due any day and I'd been anxiously waiting for news. I was the first person outside of Vanessa's parents that he told. His voice was thick with emotion, exhausted and exhilarated at the same time. "Mom, she's here. Emma Grace, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, she's perfect." I cried on the phone, overwhelmed with joy and relief and a complex tangle of emotions I couldn't quite name. Joy that Emma was healthy, that Marcus and Vanessa were okay. Relief that I was being included in this moment, that I hadn't been shut out again. Grief for all the moments I'd missed with Marcus, all the distance that had grown between us. Gratitude that we were rebuilding, slowly and carefully. Fear that I would mess this up somehow, that I would overstep and push them away again. He invited me to come meet Emma that afternoon, and I rushed to get ready. I rushed to the hospital with flowers and a teddy bear, a soft pink one with a ribbon around its neck. My hands were shaking with excitement and nervousness. What if Vanessa didn't really want me there? What if this was just Marcus being polite? What if I did something wrong? But when I walked into the hospital room, Vanessa smiled at me. A real smile, warm and genuine. She was holding Emma, looking exhausted and radiant at the same time. "Do you want to hold her?" she asked, and I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Holding Emma for the first time, looking down at her tiny face, her eyes squeezed shut, her little fists curled against her chest, seeing Marcus's nose and chin in her features, I felt something shift inside me. This was a new beginning. A chance to do things differently, to be the grandmother Emma needed without the baggage and mistakes I'd brought to parenting Marcus. A chance to love without grasping, to be present without being overwhelming, to support without controlling. Being a grandmother was different from being a mother. There was less pressure, less fear, less of my identity wrapped up in it. I could love Emma fiercely without needing her to be the center of my universe. I had my own life now, my own interests, my own sense of self. Emma was a beautiful addition to that life, not the whole thing. It was a healthier balance, and I could see that Marcus and Vanessa relaxed around me more because of it. I wasn't desperate and grasping anymore. I was stable and secure in myself. We fell into a rhythm over Emma's first year. I babysat once a week, giving Marcus and Vanessa a date night. I came to her first birthday party and didn't try to take over or make it about me. I sent pictures and updates to Rachel and my friends, but I didn't overshare or make Marcus and Vanessa feel like their privacy was being invaded. I'd learned where the boundaries were, and I respected them. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I wanted more, when I felt that old ache of being on the outside. But those moments passed more quickly now. I had other things in my life to fill the spaces. My relationship with Vanessa slowly improved. We weren't best friends, but we were friendly. We could have conversations that didn't feel like walking through a minefield. She started asking my opinion on things occasionally, and I gave advice only when asked, keeping it brief and non-judgmental. She told me once, late one evening when Marcus had gone to get Emma from her crib, that she was glad I was in their lives, that she'd been wrong about me at first, and she was sorry for how cold she'd been. It was a moment of grace I hadn't expected, and it healed something in me I didn't know was still broken. Marcus and I talked on the phone every couple of weeks. Nothing heavy, just checking in, sharing bits of our lives. He told me once that he was proud of me for the changes I'd made, that he could see how hard I'd worked to give him space while still being present, that he appreciated it more than he could express. Those words meant everything to me. More than a big apology, more than a dramatic reconciliation, that simple acknowledgement that he saw my effort and valued it was enough. 2 years after the wedding I wasn't invited to, Marcus and Vanessa renewed their vows. It was a small ceremony in their backyard with close family and friends. The backyard had been transformed with string lights hanging overhead, white folding chairs set up in rows, flowers everywhere. Marcus called me himself to invite me, his voice tentative but warm. "We're doing a vow renewal," he said. "Just something small to celebrate 2 years together. We'd really like you to be there. And actually, we were wondering if you'd be willing to read a poem during the ceremony." My throat closed up with emotion. They wanted me there. Not just as a guest, but as a participant. They wanted me to be part of their celebration in a meaningful way. "I'd be honored," I managed to say. "Thank you for asking me." In the 2 weeks before the ceremony, I agonized over which poem to choose. I read hundreds, looking for something that captured what I hoped for them, what I'd learned about love and marriage and second chances. I finally settled on one about love and growth and second chances, about how the strongest relationships are built on choosing each other over and over again, even when it's hard. I practiced reading it out loud, timing myself, working on my delivery. I wanted to get it right. The day of the ceremony was perfect. Clear blue sky, warm but not hot. A light breeze that made the string lights sway gently. I arrived early as requested and helped set up chairs with Vanessa's brother-in-law. Vanessa came out in a simple white dress, her hair styled in soft waves, looking more relaxed and happy than I'd ever seen her. She hugged me, a real hug, and thanked me for coming early to help. Marcus was in the house getting ready, and when he came out in his suit, my breath caught. He looked so grown up, so handsome, so sure of himself. He caught my eye and smiled, and I smiled back, blinking away the tears that threatened to spill over. The ceremony began. Emma, now 2.5, was the flower girl, taking her job very seriously as she scattered rose petals down the makeshift aisle. Vanessa's sister was the maid of honor. Marcus's best friend from college was the best man. And I had my moment to read. As I stood in front of everyone, the poem held in my slightly shaking hands, reading those words about love and growth and second chances, I felt something settle inside me. This was right. This was good. Not the relationship I'd imagined having with my son, not what I'd wanted or expected, but it was real. It was honest. It was built on respect and boundaries and mutual effort. Looking at Marcus and Vanessa holding hands, smiling at each other, surrounded by people who loved them, I felt genuinely happy for them in a way I hadn't been able to feel at their first wedding, the one I hadn't attended. Because this time, I was there not because I'd demanded to be, not because I'd guilt-tripped my way in, but because they wanted me there. Because we'd all done the hard work of healing and changing and finding a new way to be family together. And that meant more than being at any wedding could have meant. Looking back now, I can see that getting excluded from Marcus's wedding was the worst thing and the best thing that ever happened to me. The worst because it shattered me, forced me to confront painful truths about myself and my relationships. But the best because it woke me up. It made me realize I'd been living half a life, pouring everything into Marcus and neglecting myself completely. It gave me the push I needed to build a full, rich life of my own, to find identity and purpose beyond just being someone's mother. I think about that text message sometimes, the one that started this whole journey. We got married yesterday. 4 words that destroyed me, but also 4 words that ultimately freed me. Freed me from the suffocating grip I'd had on Marcus. Freed me from the identity prison I'd built for myself. Freed me to become more than just a mother, to become a complete person with my own dreams and desires and relationships. It was a brutal way to learn that lesson, and I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone. But I'm grateful for where it led me. Marcus is happy. Vanessa is happy. Emma is thriving, a bright, curious 2-year-old who knows her grandmother loves her but doesn't depend on that love for her sense of security. And I'm happy too, in a way I haven't been in decades. Not the frantic, anxious happiness of trying to hold on to something that's slipping away, but the quiet, grounded happiness of knowing who I am and what I want from my life. Of having relationships that are healthy and balanced. Of being enough just as I am, without needing to be everything to anyone. I still paint. I still hike. I still volunteer at the animal shelter, where I've become particularly attached to an elderly dog named Buster, who nobody else wants to adopt. I'm thinking about adopting him myself, giving him a home for whatever time he has left. I still go to book club and lunch with Margaret and art classes at the community college. I still see Dr. Chen once a month. Not because I'm in crisis anymore, but because I've learned the value of having someone to talk through life with. I'm even dating someone semi-seriously now, a man named Tom, who I met through the hiking group. It might go somewhere or it might not, but either way, I'm enjoying the process of getting to know him. And I still see Marcus and Vanessa and Emma. Not as much as I once desperately wanted to, but regularly. Enough to feel connected, to be part of their lives in a meaningful way. We have dinner once a month. I babysit Emma. I show up for birthdays and holidays and important moments. But I also have my own life, full and complete without them. And that balance, that ability to love them without needing them, has made all our relationships better. The other day, Emma toddled over to me at a family barbecue and climbed into my lap. She handed me a dandelion she'd picked and said, "For Grandma," in her little toddler voice. Marcus was watching from across the yard and he smiled at me. A real smile, warm and genuine, without any of the tension or guilt or resentment that used to color our interactions. Vanessa came over and sat next to us, and we chatted about Emma's preschool options while Emma played with my necklace. It was an ordinary moment, nothing dramatic or extraordinary, but it was everything I needed. Proof that we'd made it through the worst and come out the other side. Proof that relationships can be rebuilt, that trust can be restored, that love can survive even devastating betrayals if everyone is willing to do the work. I'm not the same person I was when I sent that text asking about wedding times. That woman was desperate and scared and clinging to a relationship that was suffocating both her and her son. I'm stronger now, more independent, more whole. I have a life worth living that doesn't depend on Marcus's presence in it. And paradoxically, that's made our relationship better than it ever was. Because he knows I don't need him in that desperate, grasping way anymore. He knows I want him in my life, but I'll be okay without him. And that freedom has allowed him to choose to be close to me without feeling trapped. Sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep, I let myself imagine what it would have been like to be at that wedding. To see Marcus in his suit, to watch him and Vanessa exchange vows, to dance with him at the reception. The grief of missing that moment will probably never fully go away. But I've learned to hold it gently, to acknowledge it without letting it consume me. It's part of my story now, part of what shaped me into who I am today. And who I am today is someone I'm proud to be. Someone who survived heartbreak and came out stronger. Someone who learned to let go and in doing so, gained something even more valuable than what she lost. If I could go back and change what happened, I'm not sure I would. The pain was excruciating. The sense of betrayal and loss was almost unbearable. But it forced me to grow in ways I never would have otherwise. It taught me lessons about love and boundaries and identity that I desperately needed to learn. It gave me my life back, and for that, as strange as it sounds, I'm grateful. Not grateful for the cruelty of being excluded, but grateful for the wake-up call. Grateful for the chance to become more than I was. Grateful for the opportunity to build something better from the ashes of what was destroyed. So yes, they got married yesterday, and I wasn't there. That truth will always hurt on some level. But it's not the end of my story. It's not even the most important part of my story anymore. It's just one chapter, painful but ultimately transformative, in a life that's still being written. And the chapters I'm writing now, the ones where I'm the protagonist of my own life instead of just a supporting character in Marcus's, those are the chapters I'm most proud of. Those are the chapters that define who I've become. And who I've become is someone I genuinely like. Someone who's learned to love without losing herself. Someone who's built a life worth living. Someone who's finally, after 55 years on this earth, figured out how to be enough just as she is.